Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Caitlin. I'm one of the mentors for the University of Michigan Psychology Star Scholars Program. And today we're hosting a panel to hopefully introduce you to some of the kinds of careers that you can have after doing a PhD. So the way that we'll do today's panel is first we'll have a sort of a broad introduction to sort of what benefits of doing research and sort of the trajectory you can have from where you are now as an undergraduate or grad student to where you could be afterwards in a career path. And then we will introduce our panel and then we'll get started with asking questions of the panel. So if at any time you have questions, you are free to enter them into the chat feature and we'll have that being monitored so that we can have your questions asked as well. So definitely feel free to ask questions as they come up to you in the chat. And then we'll also have time at the end for some questions if you wanted to ask more if they haven't been answered by that point. Okay, so with that, I guess we can get started. All right.
So Caitlin, would you like me to take this part over then?
I could.
Or do you want to go through this? Okay. I'll tell you, why don't I go ahead and go through these next couple of slides here. So my name is Cindy Lessig. I'm the professor who is working with the Star Scholars Program. And so just to start off with, even if you are sort of in your first year and you're sort of saying, wow, I really don't know if grad school is eventually what I want to do. I'm still thinking about this. I really encourage you to get involved in research. So first of all, it's going to be the best way to find out if grad school might be the thing for you. And second of all, it prepares you for a great many careers even before you go on to grad school. So in most cases, you're going to be working with people, and if you're doing biopsychology or neuroscience, also with animals and doing surgeries and things like that. In almost any lab environment, you're going to be balancing independent work with collaborating as a team. And again, that's going to be a critical thing to do in almost any career that you have. Likewise, problem solving, synthesizing knowledge, applying it to new situations. You'll be communicating information to people from different backgrounds. And then depending on your discipline, some of them may put more or less emphasis on things like data science, which is a huge career right now for a lot of people, programming, and there may also be other skills that are specific to your area of study. So some of you may have gone to our previous session where we talked about getting a research position and also how you could do skill building even if you weren't able to get a position this year. If you didn't see that one, I really encourage you to go ahead and visit our website. And it will give you an idea of the many different things that getting involved in research will help you build up and prepare for. So go ahead and switch on to the next slide. So that's that. Even if you're not sure if you want to be a professional, I have to say that if it does turn out to be the right thing for you, it can be pretty great. You get to do science on something that you love. This was really what attracted me to it when I was a high school student and found out I worked in a lab just for a week, and I was amazed because I said, wait a minute, you mean I can ask any question I want to, and as long as I can convince somebody else that it's a good idea, I can go ahead and do experiments and solve a problem that nobody else has before. Okay, yeah, sign me up. It's also really great to work with students and help them learn and get their enthusiasm and their ideas. You're communicating with smart, engaged people all over the world. So especially if you're involved in research, you're not just working with the people at your university, you're working with the people around that are in your field just everywhere. You also get to travel to great conferences, at least when there's not a pandemic going on, and get to visit really cool cities and learn about all different cultures. It's just, there are a lot of side benefits to this. You can also work a lot by serving the community and causes that you care about. So in my case, we study things like aging and training, and we work on things with Parkinson's disease and people with falls. And we often have outreach to those communities that we are interested in working with and doing research with, and try to help them see how the research benefits them. You have a flexible schedule. You work a lot, but you often get to choose your own hours quite a bit beyond teaching. And then it comes down to the last piece. So it is a commitment and a lot of work too. I don't want to underemphasize that part, but honestly, if you like it and it's the thing for you, a lot of it really doesn't feel like work. It just feels like this is the thing that I want to do. Go ahead on to the next slide. You also have other options too. So you may recognize some of these people. All of these people are psychology majors. Some of them have actually published studies and done research in psychology as well. So Mark Zuckerberg, so you can imagine, I mean, this guy knows our psychology probably more than anyone else, right? Because he's using that to build his business up. Wes Craven, so the guy who does horror movies, you can see where psychology would come in very handy there. Lil Wayne in entertainment, and also Gloria Estefan. So being able to rock your emotions up and down with their music. Natalie Portman, likewise. So a lot of people don't know that she's actually a published neuroscientist. Aloe Black, also a musician, and of course, Jon Stewart. So again, you can see where psychology and humor will come in together. So you can really use those skills in a lot of different ways. So not all of us are going to become as famous as the people on the previous slides. So you can see here, these are the kinds of careers that people have in psychology. So if you take a look, only about a quarter of people actually end up working at a university. So even if you go on and you get your degree in psychology, it doesn't mean that you are necessarily targeting yourself to be a professor. And we'll hear from a lot of people today who have gone into different careers. So hospital and health services is another big one, government and the VA medical centers, business or nonprofit, having an independent practice. But again, you can think of where product design and marketing, where psychology comes in very handy there. Video game design, being a legal consultant or working on criminal justice reform. Environmental conservation, how do you convince people to do what they need to do to help preserve our environment. Sports, business consulting. The one that I always think would be my alternate career if I weren't a professor would be science outreach. And also helping to reduce health disparities. So targeting people and helping them find the interventions that are going to be the ones that work well for them and their communities. So go ahead to the next slide. If you're sort of really thinking about what do I want to do, what area of psychology do I want to focus on, what area of research do I want to focus on, I really recommend taking a look at this My Individual Development Plan. It will take you just a little bit to fill out, and then it helps you assess what your interests, your values, and your skills are. And it also tells you then sort of what careers match up with your interests and values, and what kind of skills you might want to develop to help you target those kinds of careers. And of course, events like our panel today, where you hear firsthand about different kinds of careers, are also a good idea.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so so that is sort of our general overview about, benefits of research and different trajectories that you might have afterwards. So we have a great panel for you today. So these are our panelists. I thought it might be easier to have everyone up here on the screen, and then that way, that's how we can decide in order, at least for introductions. So if you would like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, including what your current position is, so what it is that you do.
Hey, so I'm Amy Westmoreland. I graduated with my PhD in psychology in 2018. I had to think about that for a sec. Right after leaving Michigan, I joined as a data scientist at Indeed, which is a job search company. So I help build models to predict things like whether a job seeker will be hired for a given job.
Hi, I'm Kira Phillips. I work at Exponent as a scientist, and I'm involved in that litigation consultant. It's a large scientific consulting firm. I joined straight after finishing my PhD in biopsychology, looking at the individual differences and mechanisms for sustained attention and cue detection. And a large part of my work is doing expert analyses and testimony for use in litigation and trials involving accidents and failures.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Elise Demeter. I'm a senior assessment research analyst at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and that's in Charlotte, North Carolina. I also have an associate graduate faculty position. I run an applied research program on student learning and on student success. And for us, that means how do we make undergraduates and graduate students graduate, get through our doors, and get through our doors in a timely manner. And so that's the work that I do every day, is to better the outcomes of our students.
Hello everyone, I'm Giulia Elli and I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at Michigan in the Department of Psychology, specifically in the developmental area, so I work with children. I did my PhD in psychological and brain sciences at Johns Hopkins. My work at Hopkins focused mostly on the role of language and experience in learning about the world. And to do that, I work with blind participants, because to ask how these two different things contribute to learning, one smart thing to do that is taking away one. And so if you work with someone who does not have access to vision, then you can ask, in the absence of that, what can they learn through language, causal inferences, and other mechanisms. And now that I moved here to Michigan, I'm focusing more on what we can learn from language as children. So I would say like I'm more in the classic trajectory of what you will consider PhD postdoc, but I'm happy to answer all your questions, of course.
Nestor, I think you're up.
Yes, yeah, I didn't know if I was the last one to go. Hi, everybody. I'm Nestor Lopez Duran. I'm the odd duckling here because I'm the one in the panel who is still in academia. I'm an associate professor here in psychology, except that my life has gone through different cycles, and two of those cycles involve non-academic work. I spent some years between after I finished my PhD and coming back to academia, working in industry. I was an executive producer for a film company. And if you Google my name, you might find me on the Internet Movie Database, and people get really confused. It's like, what is Nestor? Is that like his twin brother with the same name? So that was a fun time during my life. And then more recently, from work that was done in my lab, I actually founded a software company. So I'm the founder of a software company, and that company has actually grown, now has 25 full-time employees, and the software is being used in over 100 universities around the world. And so it has been very exciting to see that part of the intersection between being an academic and also being involved in software and entrepreneurship.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma Flores Scott, and I am the Director of Recruitment, Engagement, and Partnerships at Rackham Graduate School here at the University of Michigan. I completed my PhD in 2011, and I did a postdoc for 2 years in the graduate school at the University of Washington, and then came to Rackham. In my role, I do a lot of things, but we start with prospective students. So we support several different initiatives to have undergraduate students like yourselves to kind of learn what graduate school is all about and to decide whether or not it's right for them and where would be the best institution, what's the best program. And then once students do join us at Michigan, we support their transition through a variety of orientation programs, connecting students to various communities. And one of the groups that I work with in particular are the Rackham Merit Fellows, which is Rackham's sort of premier fellowship program that we offer. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I hope that all of you in the audience can now see what a great and diverse panel we have for you today. My first question that I was going to ask was kind of answered by a lot of you in terms of what your educational path was. What did you do your major in? To what did you, if you did a master's degree or worked before you did a PhD, what was that like? And then whether or not you did a postdoc. So many of you already answered that question, which is excellent. So you can, as you're answering further questions, if you want to add in those details, you definitely can. But I'll just skip ahead to this next important question that I think a lot of people have is sort of, if you had this trajectory to go into a PhD, at what point did you decide that that a non-academic career path was what you wanted to do? So did you go into a PhD already knowing that industry was something you wanted? And if not, what were sort of the things that drove you to decide to look into those other kinds of fields? And so from here, we don't have to go in any particular order. Anybody that is excited to talk about their path, by all means do so.
Yeah, I can start us out if you want.
Thank you.
So I didn't fully commit to leaving academia until the fall semester of my 6th year of my PhD. I think I started the PhD program thinking like, oh yeah, I would be like not only a faculty member, but specifically an R1 faculty member at the R1s that we like, not the other R1s. Like it's very elitist. So it wasn't until my 6th year I decided to go to industry. There's a lot of reasons why. Part of it was because I don't enjoy teaching. And no offense to any of my students who might be in the Zoom call. You're great. It's not you, it's me. Also because like I wanted to choose where I live. And a lot of times when you choose a faculty position, there's a limited number of faculty positions open and you can't be too choosy. And also because like a lot of my research in grad school was on things that had a lot of social relevance in terms of employment discrimination and how to reduce employment discrimination. But that work was interesting to me, but it had no real people impact. Like it didn't actually affect people's real lives. Like I wrote discussion sections in my papers, but like that didn't actually impact real humans. So that's why I wanted to like join a company where I could have actual and measurable impact. And lastly, I'm not gonna lie, like the salary in tech is very, very nice. I've had Indeed for a little over 2 years and I've gotten 4 pay raises. So yeah.
I really liked that answer and I really resonated with a lot of the things that you said. So I appreciated your candor there. So I'll give a little bit of my educational background as well. So I was a biology major at Duke for my undergrad, came up to the University of Michigan and did my PhD in neuroscience, and then completed a postdoc in cognitive neuroscience, again, back at Duke University. Like the previous panelist, I also wanted to choose where I wanted to live, and I have family in the state of North Carolina, and it's a really great, wonderful place to live. And so coming out of my postdoc, I was thinking about that. I also wanted a job where I could feel like I could really kind of integrate a lot of my interests and skill sets and really apply them in kind of one focused direction. And like the previous panelist said, I like teaching, but I didn't want it to be the majority of my time. I didn't want to have a 4-4 teaching load, teaching 4 classes a semester or 2 classes a semester. I wanted to be more predominantly research and applied research. I really also like that idea of impacting people's lives. So I was really drawn to the current position I have because I'm able to be in a position that's really, I'd say 75% of my time is research oriented. And I can have a really direct implication on our procedures, on our policies, on our curriculum, on how we as a university work and operate. And through that work, really have an impact on all 30,000 of my university's students at once. I have sort of what you would call like an alt-ac career. So it's not in industry, I'm still in a university setting, but not as a professor. And so I have some of the benefits of that kind of university life and culture And I like that aspect of it. I like working with people at the university. But I agree, being able to choose where you want to live, to have some of the quality of life benefits, to have a little bit more freedom and flexibility about your career path and where you go and what shape it needs to take. Those were things that really kind of drew me to this work.
So for me, I completed my undergraduate in psychology and education, and I was very convinced I was going to become a middle school counselor. So I went to get my master's degree in counseling. And while I was a master's student, I became painfully aware of the lack of support for graduate students. And it was so striking to me, especially coming straight out of undergrad, that it really has driven my career ever since. I went to work at UC Santa Barbara in the graduate school there, and then really quickly realized if I wanted to be an advocate and support all graduate students, that I myself needed to get a PhD. And I always knew that I wanted to, I never really aspired to become a faculty. I knew that as a faculty member, I would be able to have tremendous impact on mentoring students and cultivating researchers. But for me, the real joy and excitement has come from working in a space like a graduate school where I get to interact with graduate students from across the university in this very interdisciplinary space, where I'm able to bring students together that might not otherwise find them each other and help them find the commonalities in their experiences. I think that's really powerful. I see the graduate school as a place for community building and a place to foster a sense of belonging. And so that's kind of the scale of impact that I wanted to have. And so that's really what drove my decision to get a PhD and to study doctoral education, to always sort of try and be in the graduate school space, again, as a postdoc, and then ultimately to land here at Rackham Graduate School. I love the flexibility that my position provides. There's just a lot of opportunities to do new things, try new things. I also really like that my schedule is mostly 8 to 5. I have a family, and so I really like to have a very clear kind of separation between my work and my family time. So this career in particular has allowed me to do that. At the same time, I define myself as a scholar practitioner. I'm somebody who is constantly trying to find that balance between engaging in research, assessment and evaluation, and then being able to implement and improve upon our practices and our work.
I can tell a little bit about my two different experiences in industry. The first one was right after graduate school, and it actually was part chance, part necessity. When I was doing my PhD and during the last 2 years of my dissertation, me and my wife at the time went to a film festival in Chicago to see the premiere of a film that was done by a family member who is a film director, fairly successful film director at the time. And we were in love with it. We went to all the galas and all the backstage stuff, and we were really excited about it. I really liked it. And at the time, he told me that he was splitting from his business partner and was going to start a new film company. And I always had this entrepreneurship gene where I cannot help but be gravitated for anything that has to be do with starting a business. So I'm like, can I help? Can I help? And then he's like, oh, do you know anything about film? I'm like, no, but I learn for a living. So I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of books written about it and I can read them. So he needed the help, and I began working with him, and we built the company. And by the time I graduated, I'm defending my dissertation, my wife got an academic job in New York, and we had this dual career issue. And one of us, either we were going to try to get an academic job together, which is always very difficult, or one of us was going to work into industry. And the company was at the time big enough that could move to New York. And so we were like, well, I'll bring the company to New York and start that process there. So that worked fairly well, and it was really fun time. I got to meet some celebrities in New York and play movie making for a while. And then the financial crisis in 2008 hit, and the financial crisis pretty much killed about 60% of the entire independent film industry. And at the time, I realized that I wanted to go back to academia, and when I decided to apply for postdocs, and I got a postdoc, and I came back to academia. And one of the reasons, often people ask me about this, how do you do that, of coming back to academia when you are away for a while? Because most people think like, once you're away, you can't come back. I think in my case, what happened is that I kept publishing. So during those 2 years that I was only 100% doing film, I was publishing several papers for my dissertation. So by the time that I was applying to real jobs, people didn't even see any gaps. I mean, unless you look carefully at the dates of the employment, you realize that there were 2 years that magically disappeared. But in terms of the number of publications and the date of the publications, it was like very consistent. So that one really worked. And then many years later, something happened where I had a need for a software that didn't exist, and I was able to get a grant to create it. And eventually the software got spun out of the university into a company in town. And I have been involved to this day. I'm part of the board of directors, and I've been involved in a little bit of advising on the management and more of visionary for the product itself. The company has their own CEO and 25 employees working full time. But it has been really exciting to see that. And so I'm more of a content skeptic. I just have the entrepreneurship gene that I'm pretty sure at some point I'll do something else because that's where I gravitate on, regardless of what it is. It's just about the excitement of putting together a company and seeing it grow.
And a lot of what other people have touched on, I think Amy in particular, applies to me as well, having some flexibility. The salary for starting was higher, and I have only been there for a little over a year and have already gotten a raise as well. I don't know what will happen now that COVID-19 has kind of disrupted business plans a bit, but they seem really supportive. And then one of the things on like a personal side for moving is that I found that within the academic setting, the deadlines are often self-imposed and self-set. You have to meet the grant deadlines. Those can be moved. There are multiple sessions. When you publish, you need to publish now, but there's no kind of set deadline of when that occurs. And so in my current role, all of my deadlines are set by courts, by our clients who are lawyers who say, I have a motion in a week. Can you do this project for me? So that has been really useful for me in being kind of productive and being kind of fulfilled in the work without feeling like I'm drowning in it. And then I've really enjoyed it's a lot of like solving puzzles. So it still has this research element of how does this research apply to these real world scenarios, and how likely is it, or what human factors contributed to these accidents, has been a nice extension of understanding the psychological research, having participated in it and designed experiments and applying those in this real world setting have been a great path for me so far.
Well, I close by saying that I'm not in industry. I'm still in academia. I'm doing my postdoc. So my path to my postdoc, I think it's been pretty standard, at least for my accent probably already gave away that I'm not from the US. So I'm from Italy. I did my bachelor in Italy, and there, already when I started my bachelor in my first year, I had this very vague idea. It was a very clear sense that I wanted to do research, but it was a very vague idea because I didn't really know what research meant. And so I started getting my experiences in labs and doing the research assistant work. And I decided, yes, I want to be a researcher. And so the way it works in Europe is that before applying to a PhD, you do need a master. So a master is not part of the PhD as it is here, but it's something you do before. So I did my master in cognitive science with a specialization in neuroscience at an institution that was very international. So it was still in Italy, but like half of the faculty members were from the US, the other were from all over Europe, half of the of my classmates were not from Europe. So it was this very international setting and extremely centered on research. And so from there, doing a PhD was sort of like your expected natural path, because already the people who were doing that master were very research oriented. And so then I moved to the US for my PhD, and I got to do my PhD in an R01 institution, which also was mentioned before by Amy, and for those who are not familiar with the term, are university that are extremely research centered. So if you're a faculty there, the most of your time is spent doing research rather than teaching. And this sort of primacy of research over teaching is throughout, to be honest. Like even for graduate students, you are told that like being a teaching assistant is not your priority, or succeeding in your own classes is not your priority. Your priority is your research, because everything else you do, it's to make you a better researcher. And that said, it was natural for me to think, well, then I'm going to do a postdoc. But to be honest, during my last year of PhD, I've been fidgeting with the idea of switching to industry, and it's something that is constantly in the back of my mind, because while on the one hand, I do love doing research, and something that was said in the introduction is the great perk, I think, of this job is that you have a question, you can ask that question. No one question whether your question is important in the sense it's going to produce a tangible value that you can attach to something, or can you like produce something that is going to be sold by or a product. It's just a production of knowledge, which I think it's very liberating and fascinating in a sense. But on the other hand, there are some constraints on the job, like someone mentioned before, where you go to live. Financially is not the most remunerative job. And also we have to be conscious of the situation we are living now with the pandemic that hit economically many institutions. The job market already before was not amazing, and now it's going to probably be even stricter, and it's going to be even harder to find a faculty position. So while I've been bred to think of myself in that role, I think it's very natural for anyone that does a PhD nowadays to think of alternatives.
Thank you, everyone. Everyone touched on a lot of things that I made some notes on. So please feel free, if you want some like clarification on either terms that people have mentioned about what it's like to either be a graduate student or, you know, like what an R1 institution is or something like that. All those questions are also fine to drop in the chat, and we can call attention to them and make sure that everyone understands what's being said. One thing I wanted to kind of highlight from what Nestor said actually was, when you're doing a PhD, you are learning for a living. And I really love that, that phrase, because it's true that you are sort of trained in a PhD to problem solve. And usually you are problem solving something really specific to your research or your experiments, or like you encounter a problem and you're trying to like MacGyver your way through how to fix it. And that is something that sort of keeps the job always interesting, always changing. It's never really monotonous. But what that really does is give you these tons of skills in how to problem solve anything. So even if you think that, you know, oh, I have no idea what this is about, like how could I problem solve in this field, you would figure it out pretty easily and probably surprise yourself, because you have those skills after 5 to 6 to 7 years of doing a PhD that are just ingrained in you on how to solve those problems. So that's why a PhD can be really versatile and not just bring you to a postdoc into a career as like a faculty position at an R1 institution or something like that, because of all of those skills that are built into the problem solving nature of being a PhD student. So I just wanted to kind of call attention to that as sort of like a transferable skills plug for why PhDs are more than just, you know, becoming a doctor to teach at a university. So another sort of distinction I wanted to make before we move on is that we have been talking about R1 institutions. So the University of Michigan is an R1, and I know that Julia touched on what this means. So it really means that the university receives a ton of money to do research. And so the faculty that are hired here, their primary goal is to produce data from the research that they're doing. But of course, we're also a university, so teaching is another thing that, that everybody does here. So that's built into a lot, but not every single graduate program as a PhD student. So the role that you might have in teaching as a PhD student could change depending on the kind of institution you're at. So that could be from as little involved as just having some office hours and grading for other classes to what the University of Michigan has, which is, you know, being a graduate student instructor, where you're teaching a whole discussion section that is built within a larger lecture that is taught by faculty. So you can see how little or how much you could be involved in teaching there. And we did have some people who mentioned that they really do enjoy the teaching aspect of what they got out of their PhD, but it wasn't something that they wanted full time. However, you could go in that direction and do more of a full-time teaching job if you didn't choose to go to an R1 institution, for example. So if you ended up loving teaching, other research or other universities and colleges that don't get as much money for research have more of that opportunity to teach. And so something like a smaller liberal arts college, which which is usually a smaller school, but also has less research going on, would be more teaching heavy. So even after hearing from everyone here, we still have that liberal arts college experience that's also an option on the table that is still different than the R1 institution faculty position, but focuses a little bit more on teaching, if that is something you're interested in. Okay, so those are some things I just wanted to point out before we move on. So I guess since everyone's trajectory seemed a little bit different, which is obviously fantastic. Was there ever a point in your path that once you decided that you were interested in industry or tech, were you able to identify skills that you did not have or that you weren't getting from your PhD, and how did you go out and get them? So I just talked about how you could be really versatile in what you can do based on being a trained problem solver, but are there specific skills that your job requires that you had to go out and find yourself in order to be marketable in industry?
I'm going to go ahead and jump in, partially because I need to leave a little bit early, so I wanted to apologize in advance. The first thing that came to mind, though, I was in my role for about almost 2 years here at Rackham Graduate School, and I was doing programming for graduate students. And then I had the opportunity to become the director of this area. And all of a sudden, I was in a role where I needed to manage a team, and everything related to hiring, supervising, coaching, proving time. I mean, there's just the list goes on of all of these dimensions and elements that I really had no experience or training in. And again, I don't know that it was something I could have anticipated or, could have, sought out when I was getting my PhD, but it definitely was a huge new area, and it continues to be an area that I am constantly seeking to grow and gain new skills and be better at. And so again, I just to echo this idea of transferable skills. I mean, again, I think the thing that the PhD provided me with was, again, just sort of that ability to learn, to, I'm always learning, and to seek out the information, to think about, again, how to be a supportive supervisor and to find the framework. I think that would allow me to do that, and all of that was pulling on my experience during the PhD and the training that I received there. So that was the first thing I just wanted to share. And again, I apologize for having to leave. Please, anyone, feel free to contact me. I provided my email address in the chat. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. I just wanted to highlight really quickly that that, as was mentioned in the chat, that Emma is a great person to reach out to if you are interested in the Summer Research Opportunity Program. Super quick about what that is obviously a summer research opportunity. So there is an application through the Big Ten Alliance where you can apply to work at a different institution within the Big Ten Alliance and do research over the summer. A lot of those programs are funded and provide housing. Some provide room and board as well. So that's something to maybe have put on your radar. Usually applications for that are due sometime in February or early March, as are other summer research opportunities. So that is, oh, and you can also get free GRE classes, which is a standardized test to take as required by many, but not all PhD programs. So if that's something that you're interested in, Emma provided her email for contact. So I just wanted to throw that out there because that's an opportunity that exists not just for students outside of the University of Michigan as well, of course. So I just wanted to highlight that. Okay, so back to finding other skills that you might have needed for your industry job.
I could chime in here. I really liked the introduction slide about some of the transferable skills you can get from your PhD, and I found that that was really true. I certainly think the problem-solving skills, definitely being able to think about different pieces of data and to tell a story on the basis of different pieces of data and put that together into a picture that makes sense and can be communicated to others, I think is a really valuable and translatable skill. I liked the aspect about data science on there. A lot of the work that I do for my university really relies on a data scientist kind of hat wearing skills and being able to think through that framework of taking lots and lots of pieces of data that we have available on our students and on their experiences here at the university, and to be able to then make sense and to see patterns in that, to identify subgroups in that, and to think about, okay, how can we work in there to improve students' outcomes? And so a lot of the quantitative reasoning skills that you gain through a PhD in psychology or neuroscience, I think are really useful in the job front as well. I think besides the sort of statistics and the quantitative reasoning and the starting to how to think about telling your story of your data to others that I got in my PhD, I broadened out a little bit more in my postdoc in terms of transferable skills, and that included learning other types of statistics packages and how to code in different packages, which is just useful skills for moving to other places or in industry. I had the opportunity to work with folks who did a lot of program evaluation work, which I found really interesting, and is this sort of a close cousin to research, but more of an applied setting. And so it could be something like, for the STARS program, how do we know if this is an effective program? And how do we know if we are, all the time and the resources we are putting into this program is making a difference for you guys? And is it doing anything to improve your lives and your outcomes? What is it? What impact is it having? And how do we know? How do we know what kind of impact it's having? So I did some program evaluation work and some assessment work while I was at Duke during my postdoc. And I also had the opportunity to do a training program on communicating to broad audiences. And this was a program that Duke was offering to postdocs and to faculty members. And most of the people involved were sort of mid-career faculty members who wanted to take their research program and now broaden their reach to the public and really talk about their work to more public-facing audiences and learn how to do that. And so I went through this sort of 6-week training program about how do you engage with the public, and that could be journalists, or that could be in media, or that could be just giving public audience talks, for example. And the skills that I learned in there were extraordinarily useful. I give a lot of talks in my current position to senior leaders, both at the university and throughout the system of the UNC schools in the state of North Carolina. And in any room I'm in, you're going to be dealing with non-expert audiences because people in academia are coming from a variety of fields, and our senior leadership come from a variety of backgrounds. And I also pay that skill forward at our university, and I do a lot of workshops for graduate students and for undergraduates where I teach and coach those students how to talk about their research or how to talk about their great ideas and how to communicate those to non-technical or to broad audiences. And that's been a lot of fun as well. And so those were some of the things that I picked up in my postdoc that I've been able to sort of translate and use both in my work and then in some of the workshops and teaching that I do.
Thank you for those answers. I have sort of a follow-up ish to that. So for both Amy and Kira, you entered the industry or tech right after your PhD. So how, I guess this is a two-part question. How were you able to identify the skills that you had already gained in your PhD to match the job applications that you're seeing, or the job listings that you're seeing out there? So how were you able to translate them? Because I've read many, and it's personally hard for me to take the things that I have as skills and say, yes, that's that skill, but in the industry world, that's how you talk about it, or something like that. And then sort of related to that, like what was that job application or job search like in your PhD? So how many applications were you sending out, or were they really more targeted, if you're comfortable sharing that kind of information?
Yeah, I can go unless Kira, you want to go first. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's a lot. So when I was a grad student, I took a lot of stats classes. So in the PhD program, to required stats classes, I took at least 7 additional ones. But I wasn't doing it because I was like, oh yeah, I'm preparing for like a career in industry and I need to like know statistics. I mean, I took those additional stats classes because I enjoyed stats and I found it fun. Which is probably my recommendation to all of you, is just to like identify like what kind of things do you find interesting and fun, and really like focus on that and let that guide your future career versus being like, oh, I really want the specific role that may or may not be a good fit. And then in terms of applying to jobs, I was lucky to have a friend in tech. So she really helped me in terms of like working on my resume and doing mock interviews. And at least for most of the larger tech companies that have data science, like we understand if you're fresh out of like undergrad or grad school, that you may not have industry experience, and we're not gonna like ding you on that or anything. So most of the questions are more like your understanding of statistics. You'll have to do some like whiteboard coding in like Python or R or whatever language you choose. And then a lot of like hypothetical questions just to see how you think through different scenarios. And then in terms of the application process, I do not remember how many applications I submitted. I just remember it was a lot. And at least in tech, it can be kind of intense in terms of the interview process for data science. Like typically there's a 30-minute recruiter phone call to see if you're like a normal person and a good culture fit for the company, even though that's problematic. We could talk about that later. And then there's like a 60-minute phone interview with a hiring manager to see if you're a good fit. And then after that, there's sometimes another 60-minute interview that's like your technical skills. And then after that, sometimes there's like a homework assignment that takes 1 to 2 hours of your time. And then after that, there's like an 8-hour on-site visit where like for 8 hours, you're like at whatever company and you're doing back-to-back interviews. And then usually after that, then you're done. Unless it's Google, then there's like a hiring committee. So it's a really involved process. And I think some of the PhDs, they don't always expect it to be that intense and long. And I think a lot of that, like luckily my advisor was like practicing mindfulness, which definitely helped me, even though I struggled to be a mindful person. But just like having a lot of self-reflection and just being compassionate to yourself of like here's a list of things I really enjoy, here's a list of things I don't, and just going from there.
Yeah, I guess similar to Amy, I also had a former postdoc in the lab who moved into industry, and that connection was super useful in reviewing. I had transformed my CV into like a 1-page resume, in part because I was moving from like very specific animal research where my skills of surgery on animals or, managing an animal room were not going to be necessary and not necessarily a selling point. And so I really wanted to pare it down. What are the big concepts that I know? And I think, what are these big skills? And some of those skills in terms of identifying them came from, okay, there's this job posting application and here are their keywords. Like, how do I turn these keywords into what they're looking for and what they say is important to them? And do I think I fit that? And in part, again, as a PhD, you have this diverse skill set in being able to be adaptive. And so I think often most of the time, our skills are very adaptable to these kind of environments, these problem solving, taking lots of information and consolidating it, finding these connections and communicating that to all kinds of audiences. And I think paring it down, okay, you study one specific thing, but what went into that, right? There are so many things you have to, what are the questions? What does the world or the science world know about that? You have to be able to find all of that and really pare it down into all of these steps involve different processes and skills in order to solve them. And I think maybe taking a step back, you can kind of market those skills in that way, rather than thinking about, in this one instance, I did these very specific steps, but what do those specific steps represent more broadly? And in terms of, I got really lucky. The University of Michigan held a recruiting event for the company I work for, and my supervisor was there, my current supervisor, and I just passed over this one-page resume and then had a similar several phone interviews and then got invited out to a full day site visit and interview process.
So what I'm hearing is that networking is a big deal. Knowing somebody to help you out at any stage of these processes is definitely going to work. So I guess that my overarching advice could also be to make sure that you keep up with those connections that you're making, attend panels like these. A lot of our panelists love to welcome emails of additional questions that didn't get asked. And I'm sure that many will offer that as well, as we already have a couple in the chat willing to answer more questions. So those are kinds of networking opportunities that might not seem as obvious to you as I attended an event and I schmoozed with some person, but instead you were, showing that you were interested in this topic, and you can use that when you send that email. I attended this panel on this topic and you were one of the panelists, and I'd really love to, pick your brain about some of these things that were talked about. Even though you didn't maybe personally introduce yourself at the time as hi, I'm a panelist and I really enjoyed what you said, thank you. You can still use that as a stepping stone and help you to write that cold email that might seem really intimidating to write at first. So keeping those kinds of connections is going to be really handy at any stage of this when it comes to applying for PhD programs, and then moving on to postdoc interviews. Asking the people that have gone through the process is really going to be your best bet for finding out how they did it, so that you can see all the options that you have to do it yourself. So with that, I would like to pass along the moderator duties to Kathy, who's another mentor for the Star Scholars program.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Kathy. Like Caitlin said, I'm another mentor for the Star Scholars program. I'm currently a graduate student in the cognition and cognitive neuroscience area. So I'm really enjoying hearing people with neuroscience and biopsych and stats backgrounds talk about how they've been able to succeed in industry and then in academic jobs where they're not full professors. To kind of change the conversation a little bit, I was hoping people could talk about their current job and what they do in a day. So what is a typical day in your job? What do you like most? And what do you find the most, or what do you like the most? And what do you find the most challenging?
Well, I skipped the previous question because I'm not in industry, so I think it's my job to pick it up first. Life of a postdoc, it's pretty much the life of a senior graduate student, which means you don't have classes to take anymore as a senior graduate student, and as a postdoc, you don't either. I don't teach this semester. I could teach if I wanted, probably, but I didn't because the situation we are all going through. I didn't feel like adding teaching remotely to my plate. And so my job is literally doing research all day, every day. So I'm being hired on a specific grant, which means we have a series of planned studies that we said we are going to carry out. And those studies are in different stages of their existence, which means that some of them are almost over. We are writing up the paper, me and the collaborators on the project. And other are in the very initial phase, which is deciding exactly how to design the project, reading the literature, other paper, and figuring out the best way to ask the question we want to ask. And then there are those that are in the intermediate stages, which are designing, so create the stimuli, whether it is recording the sentences you're going to play to the children, or like creating graphics and cartoons to show to them, to collecting the data with the children remotely, which is a new challenge we've been adapting to. And then something that is a constant throughout the week is meeting with my collaborators, whether it's the PI, so the faculty I'm working with, or strict collaborator in the project, so someone I need to discuss a specific aspect of a project, or for instance, the lab manager or the undergraduate research assistant in the lab, with whom I try to also keep somewhat of a relationship, because my role as a postdoc is being a bit of a mentor or an older figure there that can explain you a bit how things go on. I would say the most challenging aspect of being a postdoc is at the same time also the best aspect, which is there's no one really looking after or over you, because you're considered an adult at that point. Your faculty is not going to keep tab on what you're doing or what you're not doing. You don't have anyone really checking whether you wake up at 8 a.m. and stop working at 5 p.m. It's up to you. And as I said, on the one hand, gives you a lot of power, but with great power comes great responsibility, and sometimes can be hard to bring yourself to the computer and say, okay, now I'm going to sit in front of this Excel spreadsheet for the next 2 hours, or I'm going to tackle this reviewer 2 comments, which is an inside joke for academia people, and I'm happy to explain the inside joke later. So there are all the nasty, quote unquote, aspect of research, but they are at the same time the ones that you also love. So.
I'll go just to give a plug for academic life, since we're in a room with a lot of non-academic people. There are reasons why I have stayed in academia, and the most recent pretty much opportunity to leave academia was with a company, because they at some point the possibility of me taking over as a CEO of the company was there, and I chose not to and stay here. And the reason why is because I think I would just be bored to death doing anything else, because I haven't found another job that would provide the level of variety in my day-to-day life than academia provides me. And I'm too kind of, I wouldn't say ADHD because it's not the right word. It's just, I just need a lot more variety and stimulation in the things that I do in a day-to-day life. And academia provides me that. So part of my day, I'm a teacher. So I teach courses. So in some portion of my day, I have my teaching hat on and I'm teaching. Some portion of my day, I am a mentor. So I'm talking to my graduate students and I'm doing writing papers with them, which is a completely different skills. Right now, I'm an administrator, so I'm associate chair in the department. So a huge portion of my day is doing pure administration, dealing with issues of budgets and managing employees and managing people and manage dynamics between other people. And that's a completely different type of skill set. And then part of my day, I'm a researcher and I'm dealing with data and running statistics and doing that. And right now I'm also writing a textbook for the large course that I teach. So part of my day I'm a writer, and I'm just literally just writing a book, like if I were just a full-time writer. So I have so much variety on what I do during the day, which to me is I see it as the diversification of sources of self-esteem, because when I get a paper rejected, it doesn't damage my entire day, because maybe an hour later I teach a really great class and I get a lot of positive feedback from there. So it's kind of like diversifying the sources where I get pleasure from, and I really enjoy that. So that's one of the major reasons why I have stayed in academia, even though I had chances of leaving.
That's interesting, Nestor. I would say that I do a lot of the same things in my day as you, maybe a little less teaching and a little more meetings and administration in my work. But I also really like the variety that I have in this sort of alternate academic career that I've built. I run large-scale research programs at my university that involve a lot of stakeholders, and then there's a lot of complexity when you're working with things that are really institution-wide. So whereas like Nestor, you might be working with your students within your department, you're managing your people as an associate chair, it's within your department. I've got to work with all of the associate chairs, all the chairs, the associate deans, the provost's office, the chancellor's office, the people in the business side of things, you know, people, variety of players across the university. And so as an example, I'm going to talk about one of the research studies that I lead. We got money from the state of North Carolina to do this work, and it's something I think undergraduates could really appreciate. So I wanted to talk about it in this panel. So I took the money we got from the state, and I've hired a team of computer scientists who are graduate students at my university, as well as a faculty member who mentors them. And they have built for me a machine learning pipeline that helps me identify students who might need extra support on their undergraduate careers to help them be successful. And then after we've identified students who might need and benefit for some extra resources, we are setting up some interventions for them where we are adding resources for them in terms of academic planning. And these are also students who have financial aid, and most of my students have financial aid at my university. So we're talking about long-range financial aid planning as well. So knowing how to manage your financial aid, how much aid you can get, where you'll hit those lifetime limits, and how you kind of manage your academic career and balance that debt as well. And so we put people through this course where they do these academic and financial aid planning resources, and have built some really wonderful web applications to use for that planning process. And then the students go through that intervention, and then we have them meet with their academic advisors so that they can vet their plans that they've come up with and have somebody check over them and make sure that they are actually on a good track. And our hope is that by working with these students, that we are able to help them make really good decisions about what classes they need to take, when they need to take those classes, what's going to happen if they withdraw from a class or have to repeat a class, how does that affect their plan? And to also understand the financial aid implications of their decisions. So if you change your number of credit hours, it can affect your financial aid package. If you're taking, many of my students take more than 4 years to graduate. They might be on a 5-year trajectory or even a 6-year trajectory to graduate. Will they have the financial resources to pay for 6 years of college? What does that look like for them? And we're really hoping that by optimizing their planning, we might be able to speed up their time to degree. It's a really cool research study. I really love running it, but I often feel like I'm playing a role, and maybe Nestor, you relate to this in your associate chair position of traffic director, right? Because it's like, I sit with my leadership team, we come up with our plans, and then it's like, oh, now I have to traffic direct that information to my graduate students to implement this change that we've decided we wanted to make. They run into some problem that they need solving. So now I have to traffic direct that information back to the other people that I collaborate with on leadership for that work to figure out how do we solve that problem that they ran into, what additional resources do we need. This work involves academic advisors, so we have to traffic direct to get information out to academic advisors across the university to onboard them to what this intervention is, what their role is, what they're supposed to do, the timeline, et cetera. So a lot of my work, I would say, there's a lot of the research and the data analysis. It's a lot of just also like funneling and communicating information back and forth across various pieces of this work so that all the stakeholders involved can be on the same page and proceed forward.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, guys, for sharing the things that you do. Does anybody else like to add what their day looks like, or what people, or what you find the most challenging or enjoy the most about your day-to-day activities?
I can share a little bit about my day-to-day. So I actually also really enjoy the variety that my current position offers. And so often there'll be a lot of communicating with clients, communicating either through email, through phone calls, trying to determine scheduling as well as details of these specific cases. I'll spend some time reviewing case materials. So those are often things like incident reports, traffic collision reports, looking at scene photos, trying to put those all together, which is a fun puzzle. We'll review testimonies, so depositions, summarize those to kind of get the parse down, okay, where might these cognitive factors play a role in this particular case. Often we'll go, this is probably more on like a week or month basis, but to site or vehicle inspections to say, were there conditions in the environment that would impact their behavior? The one thing that's kind of interesting about Exponent is we're really big on the quality of our work, in that everything gets checked, which is sometimes daunting because you'll have someone cite something, and if it's cited, someone has to confirm that that citation says what they're saying it does, which I think is great. You get a lot of support there, but that will be part of my day, confirming that what someone said was accurate. And then also there is a lot of support to continue doing research. Often a lot of my work involves vehicle accidents, so looking at how people work in cars. So we'll collect data, or we'll be analyzing it or writing it up for publication as well. It's kind of some of the scope of what I do in a week.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all for sharing. You all have very interesting and diverse jobs, which is really incredibly cool to see. So we have 16 minutes left in this panel. So I wanted to answer some of the questions that we've been receiving in the chat. So Maddie asked a question that I personally would love to know the answer to. So she said, I'm at a point where I see friends only a few years older than me receiving six-figure offers, taking spur of the moment vacations, or considering starting their families. Her question is, how do you stay focused on your goals through a long delayed reward process like pursuing a PhD? So if anyone wants to chime in.
I mean, doing a PhD doesn't necessarily mean putting your life on pause. I got married at 24 before starting my PhD, and my husband, we got married in Italy, he's Italian as well, and we moved to the US together. So I was lucky because it's extremely supportive of my choice of doing a PhD. But that, me doing a PhD didn't mean we were not going to get married or move on with our lives. And while there is this common knowledge that you don't have babies during a PhD, that's not even necessarily true. I did have some friends in grad school who had a baby while they were doing their PhD. And many young women have decided to have children during their postdocs because that seems a stage in the classic academic path that is most easy to have children at. But it's not necessarily, I don't think that doing a PhD necessarily means putting everything else on pause. That being said, it's true that if you do a PhD compared to going into industry right after your bachelor, you're probably most definitely gonna have a smaller income. So that's something you might consider, especially if you have student debts or things like that. But what you don't get in terms maybe necessary of money is the flexibility and the social support. My previous department was a very small department, which meant was very close. And so for me, coming from another country, not having family here was like my family. And in many cases, people who decide, for instance, to have children in those situations, find that it's a very supportive environment.
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, I know it's really easy to like start to socially compare yourself to other people, but it's really about like what career path you want for yourself. And like, for example, like if you want a career in data science, a lot of people ask me like, can I have a career in data science without a PhD? And my answer is yes. But just know that especially in tech, like that path will be more difficult without a PhD. Because often you have to like be a BI analyst or just a data analyst for several years before you could land a data scientist role at one of the major tech companies. But I know people who've done that and they're successful and happy.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that even if you are doing or pursuing a PhD, you can still have vacations and start families. And I definitely see that with the people in our graduate program. So Nestor did mention that there are 17 graduate students who have kids in our department, which is really incredible, I think. So along those lines, I think as a grad student, there are moments where everything is awesome and your project works and you're like, this is why I'm here. And it's like those moments are peppered in throughout the program. So it's honestly like shocking how fast a PhD goes. Even if it does seem like 5 to 6 to even 7 years is a long time. Does anybody have anything else to add about how they stayed focused throughout their PhD if they have a different perspective?
Take it by day. You can like think of the like, I mean, of course, if you are thinking of applying, you should consider it a 5-year plus commitment. But once you are into it, and I think that's probably, I would apply that to my job right now as a postdoc, and it's probably true of many jobs, is just take it day by day, because otherwise it can feel overwhelming. But if you focus on what you need to do and put a step in front of the next, then eventually you get to the day of your defense, you're like, oh, 5 years passed, I'm defending now, and you survived. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'd also just like to add, so I'm a 5th-year PhD student, so I'm nearing the end, hopefully at some point of my PhD. So I'd say, like similar to what others have said, that the days are long, but the years are fast. So as much like when it first hit me that I had to say that I was now a 5th-year student for the first time out loud and like admit it to myself, that was a sort of panic-inducing moment that I was like, how did I get here already? Because it doesn't feel like it's been that long. But of course, there's many long days in that contributed to that. So I agree that when I'm in situations where I'm with friends that are not pursuing a PhD, or I'm with family like my cousins who are similar age as me, you know, doing this X, Y, and Z with their lives, it becomes like a mental battle of like, okay, I have to just focus on, you know, I will be there, I just am not there yet. But when you join a PhD program, you have a whole cohort of other people that just joined that same program. They probably also have friends that are in those situations, you know, buying houses, like at ages that I was like, I had no idea that was possible. But, you know, those are things that I've thought about as well. But when you have that family or that close-knit community that you get when you're in a PhD program, you are surrounded by people that are also going through that similar situation. So the posts that you see on Instagram or Facebook or something from people that aren't doing the same thing as you are not as loud as the ones that you're like, oh, we're all in this together. So those are the things that at least have gotten me to the 5th year part so far.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. I'd also like to note that after your friends might be going on vacations now, but do they call themselves doctors? So that's another not perk where you should get a PhD so you can call yourself doctor, but it is a reward. The title is a reward after many years of hard work. Okay, so there was another question in the chat. So all of you have different career paths. Some of you went directly from undergrad to grad school, presumably, and then some other people might have taken a few years off after undergrad to go to grad school. And so I was wondering what everyone's opinion was on about either conducting research before applying to PhD programs, or if there's anything you would have done differently to prepare yourself better for your doctorate career now that you have hindsight, the benefits of hindsight.
Let me just provide some information about data on that, and that is a little bit different as to from the personal gains from taking a little break between here and undergraduate and graduate school. It is becoming more and more the norm that the most competitive students are coming into the PhD program after spending 2 or 3 years doing something else. And that something else vary. It might be working as a research coordinator, doing research, doing a postdoc, like at the NIH is a very common pathway, or doing Teach for America, or doing something else. But it is now more the norm that when you look at the full cohort of graduate students coming to Michigan, the vast majority of them are coming after spending 2 or 3 years doing something else, and a small minority is coming directly from undergraduate. So to the extent that it actually helps you become more competitive, it will help you become more competitive, and it's not the norm. It's never seen as something negative.
So echoing off of that, I would say it would be hard to be accepted into a graduate program that was really research focused without research experience. And that could be volunteer, or it could be that you've worked in a field in some way or shape, either as a student or, as Nestor says, as some type of post-bac experience. But that strongly would be required. I saw there was another question in the chat about a right time to get started looking for research opportunities. And I think early is great. Being a freshman is not too young, absolutely. I always think like a benefit of freshmen is that you are like being green is sometimes an asset, because I can teach you how I want you to be taught and train you the way I want you to be trained. And I know you haven't learned things in your classes yet, and you haven't gained certain experiences yet. And so I'll just need to provide those for you. So freshmen can be really awesome to work with in a research setting. And you bring like an enthusiasm for that. That is often really rewarding to us as researchers to work with. So I think, you can get involved as a freshman, or if you haven't yet, you can get involved now. And I think it's a great way to round out your undergraduate experience as well. I think you learn a lot of things about time management and about how courses operate, and about how universities operate, and about how your instructors and your faculty are thinking. And that really like broadens your view and your horizon as well in your undergraduate time. I was, I guess, one of the exceptions to the norm of I went straight from undergrad to graduate school. I had quite a research pedigree at my undergraduate institution, and so I was able to make that jump. But I sometimes wish I had taken a year or two off and paused and explored more options, or just had that breath and thought more broadly about what I wanted to do and how to pursue it and what I wanted it to look like. Maybe rather than jumping straight from one school to another school. I think there could have been a lot of advantages to that. So there's benefits and trade-offs to either path.
also related to doing research, I think something that people don't talk about is that it is kind of a privilege. I mean, like being able to have time after classes just to do research versus like saying like, oh, you have to provide for yourself and you need to work and make a living for yourself because maybe your scholarships only pay a certain portion of your life. And I see that kind of improving. I mean, the SROP program that's mentioned earlier in the chat, it also includes free housing and it includes a living stipend. And the GRE prep isn't just like a random person giving you GRE prep. It's typically like Princeton GRE prep, like people who have been trained to do that, not a random grad student. But opportunities like that is like, I would like to see more of them, especially offered throughout the academic year, like paying students to help with research, which I know is not easy because grants and everything. But being more mindful that some students don't come from like super privileged backgrounds, where they can just like not work during the academic year. And also part of me taking a job in tech is because I come from a family that can't financially support me. Like I'm alone, like I need to pay for myself. And yeah, so just like, and if that's your reality, not being ashamed of it. Because I know when I went to tech, they're like, oh, you're just going there for the money. And I'm like, yeah, because money's horrible. So.
Okay, awesome. Thank you everyone for your input and advice. Just to wrap things up, I was wondering if everyone can say just one piece of advice that they could give to either undergraduates or graduate students who are considering a career in your field. Just like one last elevator pitch of like, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So keep at it.
So if you're an undergrad and you're considering doing a PhD, think about it twice, because more than once during my PhD, I wonder whether it was the right choice. And luckily for me, in the end, the answer was always yes. But if you find yourself at a point where the answer is no, that's great. And there is value in recognizing that you tried it, you didn't work out, and you can walk away, and that's totally fine. But to me, the way to decide whether the answer is yes or no, it's who are you doing it for? Are you doing it because you want someone to be proud of you that is not yourself, like your mom or like your advisor? Like you're gonna learn that you're gonna internalize your advisor as your second mother or father, and like their judgment is gonna become overlooming every choice you make in your life. But the important question is always, who are you doing it for? And it has to be yourself. Otherwise, it's not worth it. And for graduate students who are considering doing a postdoc, that's our most natural course of life, I would say, or that's what at least I was taught is our natural course of life. And I think it could be also a good way of buying yourself time if you still want to consider options. But again, it goes back to who are you doing it for?
Yeah, definitely plus 100. If it makes anyone feel better, when I was applying to jobs, a lot of times people would contact me and explicitly mention Michigan, or they would have someone call me explicitly from a 734 area code and make it awkward. But definitely, I think the Michigan name definitely helped me land a lot of the initial interviews. And like, just know that nobody has their life figured out, including like myself. Like, and what you enjoy and the things you like can change. Like, for example, like right now, I'm at a juncture where I might actually move into a software engineering role, even though I have a PhD in psychology. Like, life is complicated and like your interests will change over time. But don't see that as stressful, just see that as like you're learning new skills and just, well, rounding out your portfolio.
I was gonna just reiterate that same topic in a slightly different way. At the stage that most people are, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, there's always this perception that I'm deciding the rest of my life right now. and that whatever it is that I decide right now is going to determine everything that happens forever. And that is so stressful, and it puts a massive amount of anxiety about whether you're making the right decision or not. But the reality is that you can reinvent yourself a million times before you are finally in a place where you want to stay there without reinventing yourself again. And you can do that. And that means that there's tons of people that have come to graduate school, decided that was not for them, and went on to have another amazing, successful careers. There are other people that came to graduate school and decided it was for them, and now they are amazing, successful careers too. There are other people that decided after finishing graduate school that actually it's a different graduate school that I wanted to do. And every year you will see a 45-year-old guy starting medical school, and that person is going to have famous, successful medical career 5 years later when they finish at age 50 medical school and begin their residency. So there's always opportunity to reinvent your life. Don't think that right now you have to make a decision that is set you up for the rest of your life, and whatever you decide right now, you have to stick to it. Because like Amy said, your interest and what makes you happy right now might change later on.
I'd add just as a closing thought maybe there that nobody expects you to have all of the answers now. And I think doing informational interviews in addition to attending panels like this one are really helpful to give you ways to explore and learn about what working in different sectors is like. I've loved hearing everybody on the panelists here, what they do. I'm like, oh, it's so interesting. I'm so curious to want to learn more. And so I would say, don't be afraid to approach people who work in areas or do research in areas that you think are interesting and you want to learn more about. People are often very willing to be generous with their time to people who are interested in their field or who want to learn more. And so setting up a short conversation to have that sort of informational interview and get a sense of what it is people really do, that I think can give you a lot of information that helps steer you towards things that might really be deep interest, as opposed to things that you maybe thought were interesting, but maybe when you got to know them more, maybe you're like, oh, no, that one's not for me. So I would say, don't be afraid to ask for people to tell you more about what the work is that they do and what their work lives are like.
Yeah, I'd really second what Elise just said about informational interviews, and recognizing that you could have an informational interview with someone and be like, that's not what I want to do. And that's okay. And you can adapt to that. I also think kind of along the grad path, you can have moments, or even in undergrad, where you might have to pivot and just be ready to adapt to those kinds of changes, and that there are, again, recognizing kind of these different moments and different paths that are available to you. So I know, like my fourth year, that's when I kind of decided to pivot. And there were a lot of times when I was like, maybe I just can't do it. But instead it's like, okay, no, I have these other skills that I'm honing and doing. And so that you can, always adapt and change. And there's plenty of opportunity available.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of our panelists, including the two who had to leave early. But I really appreciate you all coming here to talk to us today about your job, about all the advice that you have for all of us who are still on our journeys. And I guess we're all on our journeys, as Nestor said. Anyone's life can still change, clearly, as 2020 has shown us, in a heartbeat. So also thank you all for coming to this panel. And Caitlin, do you have any other closing words?
Nope, I guess just that it's never too early to start getting involved in research, but it's also never too late. So if you're a later student and feeling panicked now that maybe you haven't yet gotten as much experience as you wanted, as Nestor said, doing those years between undergrad and grad school are becoming more of the norm. I personally didn't get started in research until my senior year of undergrad. I then did 2 years afterwards continuing to work in the lab before I went to grad school. But that's sort of why I like to be a part of these programs that get the word out about what you can be doing, because you can start earlier, but it doesn't mean you don't have options later on either. Plenty of options to get started later on. Post-bac options in research programs, those are also offered. We have one here at Michigan in more neuroscience and biology, but those are kinds of things that you can still do. So I hope that no one is panicked. I hope everyone feels a little bit better rather than more panicked now at the end of this panel. But those would kind of be my closing words is don't think it's too early or too late to get started and asking questions. So yeah, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for being here. And I see that we have more people sharing information about contact information. So if you're also available to be contacted, you could drop your email in the chat. And then, everyone that's attending could, reach out for additional questions. So thank you guys all so much for attending. I hope that you got something out of this. And I hope you have a great rest of your evening.